All right, so we are going, and we're going to talk about, finish up our conversation about justice today. And um, we, as we've been kind of talking about this, we talked about justice as a attribute of God's character, that God is just and what it means for God to be just. And then also talk about what it means for us to live a just life. And we're coming down to, like I jokingly said, I'm wearing the focus verse for today. You know, that we act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. It's this chapter, Micah 6 and Micah 6:8 in particular, that kind of focuses on what does it mean to be just people. And what is it really that God is looking for in a people when he wants to bring justice to the world that he's created. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to rewatch. We started 2 weeks ago watching the theme video. We're going to rewatch it and see the big picture.
If you were a praying mantis, it would be socially acceptable to devour your mate.
And if you're a honey badger, you have no regard for other animals. You don't care.
If you're a panda with twins, it's normal to abandon one to take care of the other.
But if humans do any of these things, we would call it wrong, unfair, or unjust.
Yeah, why is that? Why do humans care so much about justice?
Well, the Bible has a fascinating response to that question. On page 1, humans are set apart from all other creatures as the image of God.
Yeah, God's representatives who rule the world by his definition of good and evil.
And this identity, it's the bedrock of the Bible's view of justice. All humans are equal before God and have the right to be treated with dignity and fairness no matter who you are.
And that would be nice if we all did that. But we know how the world really works.
And the Bible addresses that too. It shows how we are constantly redefining good and evil to our own advantage at the expense of others.
Yeah, self-preservation. And the weaker someone is, the easier it is to take advantage of them.
And so in the biblical story, we see this happening on a personal level, but also in families, and then in communities, and in whole civilizations that create injustice, especially towards the vulnerable. But the story doesn't end there. Out of this whole mess, God chose a man named Abraham to start a new kind of family. Specifically, Abraham was to teach his family to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice.
Yeah, doing righteousness, that's a Bible word I don't really use, but what comes to mind is being a good person.
But what does that even mean, being good? The biblical Hebrew word for righteousness is tzedakah, and it's more specific. It's an ethical standard that refers to right relationships between people. It's about treating others as the image of God,
with the God-given dignity they deserve.
And this word justice, it's the Hebrew word mishpat. It can refer to retributive justice.
Like if I steal something, I pay the consequences.
Exactly. Yet most often in the Bible, mishpat refers to restorative justice. It means going a step further, actually seeking out vulnerable people who are being taken advantage of and helping them.
Yeah, some people call this charity.
But mishpat involves way more. It means taking steps to advocate for the vulnerable and changing social structures to prevent injustice.
So justice and righteousness are about a radical, selfless way of life.
Yeah, and you find this idea all over the Bible. Like here, in the book of Proverbs, what does it mean to bring about just righteousness?
Open your mouth for those who can't speak for themselves.
And what do these words mean for the prophets, like Jeremiah?
Rescue the disadvantaged, and don't tolerate oppression or violence against the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow.
And like here, look in the book of Psalms.
The Lord God upholds justice for the oppressed, gives food to the hungry, and sets the prisoner free. But he thwarts the way of the wicked. Whoa, he thwarts the wicked?
Yeah, in Hebrew, the word wicked is rasha. It means guilty or in the wrong. It refers to someone who mistreats another human, ignoring their dignity as an image of God.
So justice and righteousness is a big deal to God.
Yes, it's what Abraham's family, the Israelites, were to be all about. They ended up as immigrant slaves being oppressed unjustly in Egypt. And so God confronted Egypt's evil, declaring them to be Rasha, guilty of injustice. And so he rescued Israel. But the tragic irony of the Old Testament story is that these redeemed people went on to commit the same acts of injustice against the vulnerable. And so God sent prophets who declared Israel guilty.
But they weren't the only ones. There's injustice everywhere.
Yeah, some people actively perpetrate injustice. Others receive benefits or privileges from unjust social structures they take for granted. And sadly, history has shown that when the oppressed gain power, they often become oppressors themselves.
So we all participate in injustice, actively or passively, even unintentionally. We're all the guilty ones.
And so this is the surprising message of the biblical story. God's response to humanity's legacy of injustice is to give us a gift, the life of Jesus. He did righteousness and justice, and yet he died on behalf of the guilty. But then God declared Jesus to be the righteous one when he rose from the dead. And so now Jesus offers his life to the guilty so that they too can be declared righteous before God, not because of anything they've done, but because of what Jesus did for them.
The earliest followers of Jesus experienced this righteousness from God, not just as a new status, but as a power that changed their lives and compelled them to act in surprising new ways.
Yeah, if God declared someone righteous when they didn't deserve it, the only reasonable response is to go and seek righteousness and justice for others.
This is a radical way of life, and it's not always convenient or easy. It's courageously making other people's problems my problems.
This is what Jesus meant by loving your neighbor as yourself. It's about a lifetime commitment fueled by the words of the ancient prophet Micah. God has told you, humans, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Hey, this is John and Tim from the Bible Project. Thanks for
So basically, we talked 2 weeks ago about the Psalm 146 passage, kind of showing how God shows justice in the causes that are important to him and the things that he addresses in people. And we looked at Ezekiel 18 last week, again, another example of God's justice. Really in there, he was addressing, through the prophet Ezekiel, he was addressing this idea that had kind of gotten erroneous about people suffering for the sins of their parents. He's like, no, for each generation, I treat people equally based off of whether or not they're carrying out justice or not. So here, we're going to move into that last passage, the one that they talk about at the very end of the video in Micah 6, which God is speaking to Israel about their injustice. And it's getting down towards, Micah was contemporary with, I believe, Isaiah, and he lived at a time prior to the final conquest of Jerusalem. And he spoke to the people about their arrogance and their sin and their injustice in Israel. And when you think about it, how the video talks about how Egypt had been this symbol of injustice in the history of Israel, and God delivered them from that. But then Israel went along and became basically the same thing in the way it treated the poor and the way it treated foreigners. And it kind of reminds me of the, at the end of the evening, we do the statements of faith. The third statement of faith is that God, talks about how God had worked through that one family, basically the family of Abraham. And God was faithful. He set this covenant with the family of Abraham, and he was faithful to that covenant throughout, in spite of their unfaithfulness to the covenant. And so what we see as we get into Micah and we get into these later prophets is God is really just getting down to the point of Israel, you continue to pursue injustice. You don't follow justice, and you keep following the same patterns of these other nations that oppress the poor and things like that. And we need to deal with this. And that's what leads to the exile. All right, so let's go ahead and read Micah 6. About 10 slides for this. We take turns. Who wants to read first one?
Listen to what the Lord is saying. Stand up, state your case against me. Let the mountains and hills be called to the witness your complaints. And now, O mountains, listen to the Lord's complaint. He has a case against his people who will bring charges against Israel.
Next.
People, O my people, what have I done to you? What have I done to make you tired of me? Answer me. For I brought you out of Egypt and redeemed you from slavery. I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to help you.
Don't you remember, my people, how King Balak of Moab tried to have you cursed, and how Balaam, son of Beor, blessed you instead? And remember your journey from Acacia Grove to Gilgal, when I, the Lord, did everything I could to teach you about my faithfulness.
What can we bring to the Lord? Should we bring him burnt offerings? Should we bow before God Most High with offerings of yearling calves? Should we offer him thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Should we sacrifice our firstborn children to pay for our sins? Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God.
Fear the Lord, if you are wise. His voice calls to everyone in Jerusalem. The armies of destruction are coming. The Lord is sending them. What shall I say about the homes of the wicked, filled with treasures gained by cheating?
What about the disgusting practice of Nazarene out bearing with dishonest measures? How can I tolerate your merchants who use dishonest bills and weights? The rich among you have become wealthy through extortion and violence. Your citizens are so used to lying that their tongues can no longer tell the truth.
Therefore, I will wound you. I will bring you to ruin for all of your sins. You will eat, but never have enough. Your hunger pangs and emptiness will remain. And though you try to save money, it will come to nothing in the end. You will save a little, but I will give it to those who conquer you. You will plant crops, but not harvest them.
Your will press your olives, but not good enough oil to anoint yourself. You will trample the grapes, but get no juice to make your wine. You keep only the laws of the people king. Only you follow only the example of the wicked king Ahab. Therefore, I will make an example of you, bringing you to complete ruin. You will be treated with contempt, mocked by all who see you.
So you see this, and Micah kind of uses this language a lot. And you see this often in the prophets, where God will, almost like he's a lawyer presenting a case. He's like, okay, I have a case. Let me bring this to the judges. And he's recalling to Israel. First off, he points to he often will point to his history in relationship with them, in their history also of being people that were oppressed, who then were freed from their oppression through God's hand. And he will keep reminding them of those things to kind of set the stage. So he says, go back here. You know, remember how he sent Moses and Aaron and Miriam to help you out? And Balak wanted you cursed, but Balaam blessed you. You know, he reminds them of different parts of their history where God intervened in keeping them from suffering under oppression, of the oppression of others. And then he comes down to basically, you know, where they're just basically saying, okay, what do we do? What do you want, God? And they start trying to, it's like they try to negotiate. They're like, okay, so what kind of a religious ritual will get us off? How do we just kind of pay off our fine and something like that? And he's really not interested in all that. And that's where it gets down to the key verse and the key point, the center of the whole chapter is this verse 8, where he says, you know, what I require is pretty simple. Do what is right, or act justly. Love mercy. Have mercy for others. And walk humbly with your God. You know, doing what's right. Last week we talked about the definition of the word righteousness. It's basically like if we were to put it in a contemporary language, it's basically do right by people, treat them properly, treat them the way you would want to be treated. That's where the whole idea that Jesus brings up of the golden rule, do to others as you have them do to you. It's that same idea that do what's right by other people. But instead, people were choosing not to do what's right and were looking to how they could create advantage for themselves. Love mercy, show mercy on those who are needy, but also show mercy on those who, you know, we don't all get it right all the time. So we got to remember, hey, we got to have mercy for other people when they mess up. And then walk humbly with God. And again, that comes out of just that sense of realizing nobody has it completely right. You know, anything that we call it, even when we are addressing things that we see as injustice, we got to remember that we don't have all the answers all the time either. So we have to have a little humility with that. And we kind of lay those things before God and say, God, you need to help us sort this out. Type of thing. And you get a better picture as you move beyond this of what God is talking about. He talks about he's going to bring destruction. And what he points to is he talks about how people are filling their houses with treasures that they've gained by cheating. They're using unjust scales. They're taking advantage of people. It's this whole thing of, okay, so legally I can get away with this, so I'm going to do this, whether or not it actually is fair to the other person. And it really gets down to the heart of how we live our lives. Do we live our lives to put ourselves at advantage ahead of others? Or do we live our lives to raise other people up and to seek out what's good for the majority of people? Really, when you get down to most fundamental ethical questions, that's a lot of what it comes down to. Are you seeking for yourself, or are you seeking for what's good for all? And that's where a lot of the philosophies of ethics kind of revolve around. Actually, I remember a guy I knew in Minnesota, and it drove some of the people that he was working with crazy. He was working on his his master's thesis or his dissertation for his PhD. I think it was his master's thesis. But he was working on an ethics degree. And he boiled it down to his entire thesis was that Jesus was the epitome of selflessness and Satan was the epitome of selfishness. And then when we really look at the world's problems, they revolve around selfishness, and that we need to learn to be more selfless in order to help bring the problems of the world into, bring things back into equity and fairness. So God is saying, I'm going to punish you for this. I can't let this go on forever. And God really is being merciful in this, because if you allow injustice to go on forever, if you don't allow people to experience the consequences of injustice, they will continue to move further and further along in terms of the injustice that they do. And when you look at this, and you look at how the video kind of ties it down, it brings it around to Jesus and then to us as his followers. And when you look back at this, Jesus in his own life is the best example of how to live this out. How to do right by people, how to love mercy and be merciful towards people, and how to walk in humility. And humility is not being like a doormat, but it's knowing you have all the power in the world, but you choose to rein the power in for good. In some ways, a lot of times when we talk about like the whole anti-racism discussion, there's a lot of talk about allies, because we can talk about white privilege and white exceptionalism and things like that. And as somebody who's white, when I look at things that are going on around racism, I can kind of get this guilt sense about it. But instead, if I look at where can I use my influence to benefit others and to try to create a more equitable society, that is really what basically people of color have said that's what they're looking for. It's like, don't be guilty, don't feel shame, but instead turn that into how we produce a more equitable society where we can get beyond these problems. And I think in following Jesus, in looking at Jesus's life, if we want to know how to live this out ourselves, we have to keep looking at Jesus's life and see how he walked the world, and then learn to live more like him in our walk, in our day-to-day activities and relationships. So hey, what kind of stands out to you? Like, or what questions does this all raise as you're we look at this chapter?
Not really having a question. I think it's more, of an observation that, we are seeing almost an identical situation right now.
Mhm.
And the fact that we don't really recognize it is, for all intents and purposes, it's really disturbing. And and I think it makes it really difficult to remember or try to remember, what you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's such a level of anger,
Mm-hmm.
and I,
Oh yeah.
I feel it from people and I feel it toward them as well. And, it's disturbing on so many levels.
Mm-hmm.
It causes fear, and it's so many negative emotions, and, that's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. Because, that's a very simple message. The message of Jesus is a very simple message.
Yeah.
And I think your friend summed it up beautifully. It really is, I think those are extremes. This selfishness of Satan is an extreme, as compared to probably what most of us are capable of. And, Jesus gave the example of his selflessness. We'd never be able to achieve that. It is certainly something to try, to get a little bit toward. To remember what should fill your heart and your thoughts. Yeah. And every single day, it's harder and harder to do that.
Well, it is.
I feel a little bit differently. I think the word right seems incredibly vague. I mean, I think because just how do you know what's right? I mean, just like we talk about what's right for an animal is not necessarily what's right for us. And I think that's one of the things. It's like it's vague for a reason. It's like because I think it's vague in the sense that we consider it vague, but I don't think it's vague to God.
Mm.
I think God obviously knows what is right. And I think when we're listening to our spirit, like even the part of us that is made really truly in his image, is that we know it too. Like it's not a mystery to us. You know when you're doing right, you know when you're not. You feel it. And I think, I think that's why, it feels both vague and very specific, at the same time. It's like it's vague in our sense, but not, but very specific in his, because we feel our way through it. We feel our way toward it.
Mhm.
I think it's as much about right as much about respect as it, it's almost anything else. If you are doing the other two things, if you really are merciful and, you try to remember, humility and to look at the example of Jesus, then, if I can at least respect someone, then that's a version of life. It's probably a step in a good direction. Just, if I can respect them as a person, their rights as a person, my child with them.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think about how it does get kind of cloudy sometimes. And people can even become, even in their effort to do good, sometimes it can kind of get bogged down in everything that they lose connection with that sense of, well, this isn't the way to do it, to get it done. I think there's an example in Minnesota shortly after we moved here. In fact, I knew some of the people that kind of got caught into the middle of all this, but there was a warehouse store owner type guy who was also very involved in a lot of Christian ministry type stuff, supporting and things like that. Particularly Teen Challenge was one of the big things he was really behind, and a lot of Assembly of God causes. And he got so obsessed with trying to make big gifts for these organizations that he essentially started a Ponzi scheme, and got all of these organizations involved in investing to help. And it it really created a lot of difficulty within the state office there for a long time. But when I look at it, when I look at, I didn't know that guy in particular, but I had some connection with one of the other guys that got caught up in it. And you could just tell it was like this sense of, you would watch video of him at Teen Challenge gatherings, and it was a sense of, just that good feeling you want to like really help. But as he tried to do right, he was not doing it in a just manner, and he was burning people in the process. And so that's kind of what we see happening in a lot of these situations too. I think even, it talks about how people who are oppressed, when they gain power, they can become oppressors. I think that's the other part we always have to watch out for too, is that we're not becoming oppressors in the process of being oppressed.
One thing that just makes me think about, because of where we are at right now, after being through, months and months of political commercials and stuff, and how very embedded in our political process is this whole aspect of tearing down other people in order to elevate yourself. I mean, it's like intrinsic. And I was thinking the other day, why does it have to be this way? Why does our process of elevating people to leadership in our society have to involve tearing down other people? That's what gets this whole thing of anger and just so much negative just stuff that circulates in our brains and in our relationships with each other because of this very broken process of injustice. And we end up perpetrating injustice upon people, slandering them over and over and over in order to bring about this result of an election. It's really just so, it's really destructive. nation, it's like we are self-destructing.
Mhm.
You know, how much we need to embrace this as a body and as people in our relationships with one another so that we can be positive for us instead of negative.
That's right. I think that, personally, you just got, it's so difficult to work with, for lack of a better term, the word right. Because that can be the impetus for a lot of that negativity. And a lot of that is because, I think I'm right, someone else thinks they're right. And, it's how we define that and what we're willing to put behind it. And, without ever really necessarily stopping to think about what exactly that means. And I think we've seen that from as early as the Puritans, in America. They came to America, to avoid, religious persecution that ended up being moral persecutors themselves. And, now it's something even now that, we have a tendency to think that rightness or that word right and make it define something that makes someone else less.
Mhm.
And, even the right versus left leaning description, in politics is taking on that, that meaning. And I think it's something we need to really step back and think about, what we're talking about, what that really means to us as a society
Mhm.
to progress stepping on the back of all these people. Where are we going? How are we going to end up?
I think that's where the walk humbly comes in.
Yeah.
Like, that's why it's not just to do what's right and stops. It's like, it's to do those other things, in addition to them. It's like you love mercy. It's like when you love mercy, you humble yourself. It's like you stop thinking that you have the right answer or you know what it is, but you start searching for what that right answer is. Just like you're talking about the social justice. It's like, instead of saying, well, I know what it is to be, what they need, I know what they're looking for now. You say, just like on the page that you created, it's like, you stop asking and stop telling them what they need, and you start listening to what they need. Like, what really are you looking for?
Right.
What do you want? What really will help you? Is it going to be my anger? No. Is it going to be my support? Yes.
And some of that, anger is really disappointment.
Yeah.
Letting go of that disappointment that someone's not doing what you want.
I think-
What you're expecting to do.
I don't know if there's something there.
It's pretty simple, it's just obedience. That's all it is.
Yeah.
You're either gonna do what's right or what's wrong, and it's obedience, like, I think that they're all like, I mean, if you want your life to go right, you gotta do the right stuff. If you want it to go wrong, you're gonna keep going wrong. Everything bounces back, everything you do bounces back to you. Everything that you do has consequences. That's what I'm talking about, obedience. I don't know, I look at all this. That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah. It's true. All right. Well, what does this say for us, like, as a community? I mean, we try to live this way, but I know it's hard sometimes to do that.
Leon, I
Yeah.
had a question about earlier about what Ken talked about, bringing something down, or like putting people down or whatever. Well, it's the same word as it, see, I think I've heard this in the past, from people like, you're condemning them. I mean,
Mhm.
and you're condemning them and not saying what's right and stuff like that.
Well, I think what she was talking about specifically was in the political realm. How to get into office and make other people look bad. Type
Well,
of thing.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking, I mean, like, take for instance, okay, you know how everybody talks about each other, they've been talking
Yeah.
about each other, right? They're trying to condemn each other, right?
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of times they are. They're trying to scare voters away
Yeah.
from the other party.
Yeah, I was wondering about that word condemn, like that, you know? I know it's in one of the commandments, but I didn't know, I just was wondering, other things.
Well, I think we have to look at that. I mean, when you think about condemning people, one, we don't have the power to do that. It's not our job.
Part about walking humble.
Yeah, that's part of the walking humbly part of it. Yeah, we have to be careful in our judgments of other people. We can say, well, the way I see things, this would be the right thing to do, but then we have to let God's spirit take care of what I would call convicting.
I don't want to really know what's the right thing. to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, God can teach us through His Spirit how to do what's right, but we have to do that even when we're certain of what's the right thing to do. We still have to approach it with a certain amount of humility to say, I'm not the one that can change your mind. It's going to require God to change your heart. Type of thing. You know.
And I think that's definitely where we are at right now.
Yeah.
It's like, because I mean, like we talked about the last time, like, there's always that moment, like, we can try to do all this stuff and want people to agree with us, but at the end of it, it just becomes about what you're gonna do. It's like, what am I going to do to make it happen? What am I going to do, that is going to be right? It's like, because I can't make somebody else do the right thing, but I can do the right thing. And hopefully they will learn and be encouraged by that right thing. And I think that's the thing that's so scary about where we are right now. It's like, because lots of people are trying to do the right thing. And it's like, I think everybody is trying to do the right thing, I hope. I just think they've gotten so lost in the power of it. And just like, you're the example that you used, up in Minnesota, it's like they're trying to do the right thing. And it's like they get so lost and bogged down into it, it becomes so desperate because they don't believe it anymore. They don't believe in the faith. They don't have faith in to see it through. They don't think it's going to come. They start to fear, and then or they start to get, they like the thrill of it, or whatever it is, whatever little thing seeps in. It's like, and then you lose your way. The oppressors become, or the oppressed becomes the oppressors. And it's those little small moments that just like seep into everything.
Right.
And it's so scary.
Well, like even, we talked 2 weeks ago about, I kind of introduced this thing that's going on in the city where they're trying to regulate the feeding of people experiencing homelessness. When I talk to the individual who is sponsoring this bill and some of the people that support him, I get their point of what they're trying to get at. And I go, I don't think this is the way to do it. And as much as I don't want to be, I'm going to do it. It's not like, okay, I'm supposed to have a phone call from Mike Hart sometime next week.
But I read some of the comments that you were saying on that. I think the thing that is important about that is, though, yes, they're trying to do good, but they're not doing good by asking those that actually experience.
Right.
Like, they didn't go out into the streets and really do the research to discover if this would really help.
Right.
They just decided that this is going to help. This is the way to go. And it's like, you can't do that. You don't know that that's right because you haven't been led into that experience of that righteousness. So you're just deciding something on your own, arbitrarily.
Well, that's where the CHIP and the Blueprint Council both said they're not going to endorse this bill. They're also not saying they're going to make any statement against it, of course. But they also get encouraged when you talk to these groups. Oh, great! I guess I'm really going to do this now. I think Jeff Bennett made a call to Councilor Hart. That's in 1 Corinthians 7 or 2 Corinthians 7? Chronicles. 1 Chronicles 7. Yeah, it's at the temple when Solomon prays for it's the dedication of the temple that Solomon built. And in that, God says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, repent of their sin, then I will heal their land. And pray, and humble themselves and repent of their sin. It's, and he kind of, and he kind of brings the point of the temple, is that it's like,
That kind of
This-
reminds me of.
yeah, exactly, it is. Yeah, we have to humble ourselves. Yeah, exactly. I'll let you go ahead. Keep going.
No, yeah, that's what I was saying. That kind of reminds me.
Yeah, it does. It is very much that same concept. I think that's what God was saying at the beginning of the temple, and you come around to this period where the temple is about to be destroyed again. And God's like, you still don't get it.
Second Chronicles 7:14.
So Second Chronicles 7, yeah.
I heard a pastor suggest to his congregation, setting their phone or whatever reminder to pray at 7:14 every day for, money.
Yeah, that's- Well, I think we as a people need to keep remembering this too. As we approach different issues, we address injustice in our city, that we do it with humility. Because we realize we don't have all the answers. I mean, the retort should I get back is like, well, how do you, yeah, the retort I get back, and other friends of mine got back from politicians. Well, then how do you control it? Yeah, because you're not gonna register it, you're not gonna find people for not registering and all that stuff.
You know, Leon,
How do you keep it enforced? Type of thing. What were you gonna say, Jimmy?
I had another question about it, and, we've talked about justice. There's one thing we've never talked about, and I was wondering, I know this might sound a little wild of a question, but what about justice and the liberty of the American flag? And justice for all.
Oh, the pledge? Well, that's what we aspire to
Okay,
as a
yeah.
country. We don't always do it, but we aspire to it.
Yeah, I remember when we used to get up there in school and do it all the time.
Oh, we would say the pledge,
Hold our
we
hands
say the
over
pledge
it,
today
you know,
too.
like that. Now they don't even want people doing it.
No, actually, they do.
I say it every day. I still say,
Well, this really gets me. They shouldn't do that. Kids.
but I think that brings up a really good point though. It's like we indoctrinate children. It's like, well, do we actually make sure that they understand what they're saying and they believe? It's like, they made us say it every day, and like plenty of people said it. It's like, how many people do you think really took it to heart to say, and to really say when I said injustice for all, or injustice for God, is like that I really meant that. Because I still need it today. And one of the things that I'm working for is like, how many of us can say that? And I think that if we remember that, I think that's one of the things is like, we're seeing these signs. Like, God didn't mean, this wasn't a surprise for you. But he told them time and time again, every time they messed up, was like, I'm going to destroy you. Either you love me or there's destruction. You love me or there's destruction. Every single, just like you said, in every single generation. It wasn't for you're not paying for your sins of your father, you're paying for your own sins. And it's like, so, it's like, if you love him, then there's no reason not to heed the signs and to turn back. Because we're given, because he hasn't destroyed us, we're not there yet, we're not at each other's throats fully.
Exactly.
I mean, we still have time, and there's still time to repent, even in our own personal decisions and our own feelings. It's like, and I feel bad because that's like my mom said. It's like, people are angry. It's like, well, that's the first thing you can choose. Like, stop being angry.
Yeah.
And it's like, you'll start hoping that things will take care of themselves and start finding what you can do and start looking for the good things that are working. And make those decisions at least that you can.
There does come a time, and that's something, there does come a time that we have to be brave,
Yes.
and you do have to stand up and say that it's not acceptable, and it's not going to be. And that's, we're not regularly called to do.
Yeah.
But it can happen, and sometimes it should.
So that requires discernment, though. I think that's like the part of the doing what is right. It's like, is discerning what that right moment is. It's just like, Jesus, very peaceful man, very powerful man. Could have wiped us every one of his, and all the people against him in like one thought. If he wanted to go, fine, but he didn't. What he did is that he contained himself and he preached love. Even in it's still my favorite passage. It's like, until the money changed. It's like until that moment was reached where he's like, no more. I mean, this is like that doesn't belong to Caesar. This isn't the right thing. And it's like he found his moment, and we have to be on the lookout for those moments, and then to have that discernment of what that right moment for us to act. Is it the guy with the Trump flag? I mean, not necessarily. Is it somebody that's looking for information? I have information, or I can something that I can say, the experience that I can share.
Well, I think we're going to transition to